It's the Ostrom Avenue podcast, and it starts right now.
Welcome into another edition of the Ostrom Avenue podcast here on W8ER. As always, I'm Jordan Leonard, joined alongside AJ Myers and Griffin Bloomstein. Guys, it's almost the new year. It's the end of December, which usually means pretty cold, but where I am in Florida, it means 75 degrees and sunny. I went on a boat earlier this week. It's going to be great. I know Griffin's coming down to the great state of Florida next week, but AJ, I can bet you for a fact that this Florida weather it's a little bit warmer than up there in PA.
Yeah, making me jealous. Currently 27 degrees on Christmas. It was like in the teens, 15, 18 degrees. So it has been pretty cold here. So definitely jealous. Could no way I could get a boat ride if I went to New Jersey or anything like that. So definitely,
Lake might be frozen at this point.
yeah.
For me
Griffin,
here
you
in
excited to come
Boston,
to Florida?
yeah, I'm so excited. Ready, get out of the snow. There's snow on the ground here in Boston. There has been for the past like week. So I'm ready to get out of the wintry weather, go enjoy Florida for a little less than a week and get out of reality because I don't think Florida's really reality.
Oh, come on. I would have said that probably like 15 years ago when I lived in New Jersey. Not that I only moved like a couple years ago, but it kind of actually, when you move to Florida and you live there somewhat full time, it takes the vacation out of Florida. Like I could never vacation unless it's like Disney World.
Yeah.
I could never truly vacation to Florida anymore now having lived here for an extended period of time. But somewhere that also is not snowy, San Diego, Syracuse, Washington State taking on each other in the Holiday Bowl later tonight. We're recording this Friday morning. Number 21, Syracuse taking on Washington State in San Diego in the Holiday Bowl. And it should be a pretty lopsided game. The line started out when the game was initially announced around 6.5-ish for Syracuse and has ballooned up to 17 in favor of Syracuse because Washington State has had 20 plus players into the transfer portal. Their head coach, offensive coordinator, and defensive coordinator all gone. AJ, what are the expectations for this bowl game tonight?
Expectations are simple. Big win for Syracuse. That has to be the case. I keep on getting deja vu to this time last year. It was already past, but December 21st of last year, Syracuse was in a bowl game in Florida, your great state of Florida, and they got blown out by South Florida, 45-0. I think another kind of similar result should be in store, but this time on the Syracuse side, whether how much Kyle McCord and those starters play, but this should be an easy win for Syracuse. I know that's what we all been saying, and I mean, I just think it's kind of hard for Washington State to generate any kind of upset when it's just going to be so many new players who have barely seen the field all season long. I find it very difficult for Syracuse to struggle in this game, given that they're having majority of their starters playing.
Yeah, I remember watching that game and I was just like it was such an exciting time for Syracuse football because at that point Fran Brown had already been hired. Kyle McCord had already committed to Syracuse and was on the sidelines for that game. So I was just feeling so excited about Syracuse football. And then they go out and get pummeled. So it's just like kind of a mixture of issues there. Glad to have that in the past and a great season that we've had here. And I'm just looking for one last win to enjoy what is probably one of the better seasons in the past 15, 20 years for Syracuse football. Just have this game. Hopefully no one gets injured. Hopefully Syracuse just goes out, takes care of business, and we get to enjoy one last Syracuse football game with Kyle McCord throwing the ball, Jackson Meeks and Aronde Gadsden catching it, and hopefully it can just put a great end to a great season.
I could tell you that game last year was pretty painful. I was there in person, as AJ mentioned. And not only was it a 45 nothing blowout, but it was also a 4+ hour long
Yes.
game, which was even worse. The game went past midnight Eastern time because of a 10-minute delay because of a Louisville, Kentucky basketball game on ESPN. And then it went 4 hours into the wee hours of the night. So hopefully Syracuse is in the favor of that this year. I think that will be the case. Washington State severely undermanned. I'll be interested to see how long Syracuse's starters play in this, because one, if they get out to a big league, but two, also, Kyle McCord, hasn't his appeals process hasn't fully gone through yet, so we don't know if his NCAA career is over. But if they're preparing for the draft, do they want to play a full entire game? Does Fran Brown want to get a look at Michael Johnson Jr., Jakari Williams, different players that could be playing next year? So see if Syracuse can get out to a big lead, make that decision easier, or how long does Kyle McCord and those players like a LaQuinn Allen or Justin Barron or Marlowe Wax play in the Holiday Bowl later tonight. Once again, 8 p.m. kickoff, 7 p.m. McClurg remodeling countdown to kickoff, double overtime going up until 1 a.m. Should be also interesting. Gus Johnson on the call. Should be some good. I can't wait to potentially hear a Jackson Meeks touchdown catch from Gus Johnson. That's just going to be some elite stuff. So not too many takes in terms of the football game, but we are doing a mini Ostrom Take Factory as we hit the New Year's. We're kind of getting a little screwed in terms of Christmas being middle of the week, New Year's being middle of the week. Makes it almost virtually impossible to get an interview around the holiday season. So we decided we're going to do some Ostrom Take Factory. I know I only have one take in regards to the men's basketball team, but AJ, how many takes do you have? And you can go first, I guess, with your first take.
I got two. One, I think honestly, I'll say my second take I think is more realistic than my first. My first take I may be reaching a little far, and that has to do
Okay.
with a very struggling and poor Syracuse men's basketball team that has not gotten off to a good run. But I think, in ACC play, maybe they'll still struggle. But come ACC tournament play, I'm assuming they'll be good enough to make that tournament. They'll go on a little run. Do they win it all? I don't know. I wrote down magical run in ACC tournament for Syracuse men's basketball. How magical that is, who knows? But maybe they win 2 or 3 games, really boost their resume to maybe being a bubble team or something like that. But by the end of the season, this team has figured itself out to an extent where they can make a little run in the tournament.
I like that ish. I don't know. I just can't see how realistic
Come
it
on,
is,
Griffin. You're always
considering
coming out
how
with the big takes.
poorly this
I
team
can
has played.
I could before Griffin goes on for his take, I could see that happening just because JJ Starling coming back at some point in mid-January. Like I can visualize JJ bringing some some firepower to this offense on a consistent basis and taking pressure off of Jaquan Carlos or an Eddie Lampkin and other people to create. Um, honestly, if they stay on the track that they are right now, making the ACC
Yeah.
tournament is not a guarantee. So we'll have to see how that take ages. But AJ, put it in there on the ground floor, getting in. So when it potentially does happen, you can go back and reference this video posted on the Ocean Avenue Podcast Twitter. Griffin, do you have any bold takes?
I do, and I was actually thinking about doing a JJ Starling take because of how good he's played in the couple of games, almost averaging 20 points. But I decided to go the coaches route. Both of my takes had to do with coaches. There's been a lot of talk about Adrian Autry potentially getting fired, and Syracuse fans all over Twitter are a little nuts. Now we love them, but they're a little crazy sometimes with the takes. And so my first take was I think that firing Adrian Autry would be the dumbest decision John Wildhack could have ever made. And he hasn't done it yet, and I don't think he will. So that's a good thing. And not to say that there haven't been some questionable decisions by John Wildhack, and there have been a lot of good decisions by John Wildhack. But Adrian Autry is only 11 games into his second season. He took over for a Syracuse program that has struggled the past couple of years. Last season was the first 20-win season since the 18-19 season. That's good. Syracuse had his best conference record, 11-9, since 2013-2014. The recruiting has been great. Donnie Freeman, Elijah Moore, even though he was recruited under Jim Boeheim's, but a lot of that was because of Adrian Autry. Yes, Sadiq White and Kyan Anthony coming next year, the two headliners of that recruiting class. The recruiting class has been great. Syracuse has the recruiting done. That's done. Adrian Autry can recruit. The question is, can he be an effective coach? And last year we saw with really bad circumstances, it wasn't his players, it wasn't his staff. It was a lot of what Boeheim left him. And it was a lot of bumps in the road, but Syracuse still figured out how to get 20 wins. And now, usually a 20-win season means an NCAA tournament appearance. Last season, that didn't happen. But this season, it's been rough. But there's been a lot of things that haven't gone his way. If Chris Bell could make even 30% of his threes, you never know. You could have multiple more wins on the season. A lot of this has not been Adrian Autry's problem. I think it's way too early to overreact. And I think that going forward, if Adrian Autry doesn't change some things up, then maybe a year or two from now, you can bring questions up. But Syracuse is not in the place to be firing its head coach when there's way too much going in the right direction rather than the wrong direction right now for the actual program of Syracuse men's basketball.
I agree that you can't fire him at the end of this year, no matter what the result is, just given the recruiting classes coming in next year. It's his second year. He did win 20 games in year one. I just don't think the excuses are there because the excuses would have been there last year when it was basically Jim Boeheim's team. Autry does pretty much recruit half the roster anyway, when he was working for Jim, but didn't fit Autry's style per se. And you still win 20 games, which is great. And like Griffin said, best season for the most part in the last like 5 years. But once you recruit all of your own guys, there's no excuse to be this poor, especially in non-conference play. And you mentioned the Chris Bell shooting and the JJ Starling injury. Well, college basketball is the one sport, maybe all college athletics, I guess, given the nature of it, where the coach, I guess if you want to include Bill Belichick a little bit, but the coach is literally the coach and the GM at the same time. You can't fault anyone but the head coach, or I guess you could include the assistants in there, but the head coach, in charge of the assistants. There's no one else to fault in terms of building the roster except for them. They're the ones recruiting in the portal. They're the ones recruiting high school players. Like they build the roster for what they want, and then they coach them to play as good as they can. So the fact that they don't have a second ball handler on this team other than JJ Starling and Jaquan Carlos is kind of sad. Because if JJ Starling gets hurt, Jaquan Carlos is out there on an island, played 40 minutes a game, and he's not an offensive play. Like he gives other people ability to make shots rather than him make shots himself is the way that Autry basically has talked about it throughout the year. So I mean, in terms of roster building, I don't think it was the best in terms of filling it out in terms of depth. And then in terms of the coaching aspect of it, Chris Bell not being able to make threes, like this ain't the NBA. That's your job to coach him out of a slump or to coach him to make threes. Granted, Chris Bell made over 40% threes last year, and now he's making sub 30. So you got to take some account in that where he's just taking a big drop off. But again, everything in college athletics falls on the head coach: recruiting, roster building, coaching. So the college is probably the only sport where there's no excuses for the head coach year in, year out.
Yeah, I think this was the first off season we saw really Syracuse men's basketball take a big dip into the transfer portal. And I don't know maybe if that was the best idea just by the looks of it, because they've done all right. You look at the guys they got from the transfer portal. So maybe that's something that Autry needs to look at in the offseason and be like, all right, I need to maybe be a little smarter in what I do come the transfer portal, and did I really find the best guys out there? But in terms of recruiting players, I mean, look at next year. I think you guys have both said it. He's clearly bringing in big names. He can bring people to Syracuse. I think that was kind of maybe a problem with Boeheim, that, he wasn't, able to swing in these big guys from the DMV or New Jersey or areas like that. Clearly, Autry has his guys, and he can do that. Now, when it comes to the coaching, yeah, I think that's the bigger issue, is can Adrian Autry coach the X's and O's? I think we've had plenty of games this season where this team is a team has gone to a zone defense against Georgetown, and Syracuse completely just didn't know what to do. And, we've had games like the Maryland game where it was like, oh, well, we were just not in it, or it wasn't toughness. We didn't have that fight. Well, then it's like, all right, how do you not have a fight for a game against Maryland, a Big Ten team, top 25 team almost in Maryland, and you don't have that fight, you don't have that drive? That's where I think people are really rightfully so questioning Autry, because he's the head coach. He's supposed to be the one motivating these players, but he isn't at a certain extent because of these defeats. But I think the good thing is, and what is going to keep Adrian Autry's job is, one, Jim Boeheim was a coach forever. I don't think Syracuse wants to just cycle through head coaches all of a sudden. And two, the players all seem to like Autry. Really haven't heard a single player be like, oh, well, the coach was doing this and that or something like that. They all seem to have Autry's back. And it does seem as if it is a team, just not a team that is performing up to the standards that they were given at this start of the season. Like I said, when you bring in big names in the transfer portal, expectations go up. When you have the number one best recruit since Carmelo Anthony, expectations go up. Haven't lived up to those expectations yet. If it was a month ago, I'd be saying, oh, well, the season's still so young. Unfortunately, we've just seen too many pummeling results where it's kind of worrying to say, well, the season's still running. Could they turn this around? I don't know. I'll go back to my ACC tournament take. I think if this team can get hot and gel all of a sudden, sure, they could go on a run. I don't know if they can sustain that through an entire season or even two tournaments, if not one.
Yeah, that's totally fair.
I mean, I agree. I think getting JJ Starling back is huge, and that's Captain Obvious statement, I know. But when you lose one of your stars, it's definitely going to take a hit. It's more of just like in terms of like the X's and O's too. It's like Can we see some offense being run? Can we see, I mean, defense, obviously they have the man-to-man, they'll get better at it. But can we see some offense being run? Like, I think there was so much reliance on both Jaquan and JJ using pick and roll and creating driving to the hoop to kick out that there is not as many clear and obvious plays being run in the absence of it. And also kind of like what AJ said, like at the end of the day, you got to get your team to go out and play. And if you're not fired up to play in the Barclays Center against Maryland in the, I'll say Gotham Classic, which is not really a pump up, name per se, but just in the Gotham Classic because that's the fact of it. In a game that you need too, because it's one of your last quad one opportunities, given how bad the ACC is this year, especially in non-con. Like you need the win, and you come out and you throw up a dud in the first half, and you were out by halftime. So that's where I think the questionable stuff comes in, like AJ mentioned. And this is where it comes in my take, my one take for now, and how to fix this, how to get how basically to get AJ's prediction right, essentially. How are they gonna improve the rest of the year and then make a run in the ACC tournament, assuming they make the ACC tournament? If anyone doesn't know, the bottom three teams in the ACC this year, because of the expanded league, do not go to Charlotte for the ACC tournament. So that's 18th, 17th, and 16th place in the league. And granted, there's only been one ACC game played by Syracuse, so still the jury is still out right there. But in terms of Syracuse getting better, especially in JJ Starling's absence, which is, projected to last until about mid to late January, is that Kyle Cuff needs to get more minutes. It's just bottom line, Kyle Cuff needs to play more. If you look at his stat line, nothing's going to jump off the page, but he's played 2 games this year where he's had double-digit minutes against UAlbany and against Maryland. Both had 10 points in that game, the only 2 games that he's gone in double-digit points. So when he plays double-digit minutes, he's more effective. He scores more. Maybe he should play more. Also, he brings a shooting aspect to this team. Like Griffin mentioned, Chris Bell has struggled mightily from three. And I'm not saying Kyle Cuff is a world beater from distance. He's 4 of 9 on the year, but in those games where he's played 10 or more minutes, he went 2 of 2 from beyond the arc against UAlbany and 2 of 5 against Maryland. Granted, the Maryland game was pretty much out of reach in that second half, but it doesn't matter. He played more than 10 minutes, allowed him to get into a rhythm. He shot 2 of 5 from 3. And not only does it bring shooting to the floor, it also brings a ball handler. He's not Jaquan Carlos. He's not a true point guard, but he's definitely a better dribbler than Elijah Moore. He's definitely a better, probably the second best dribbler on the team right now, if not the third if JJ Starling's in the game or on the healthy and on the roster. He allows Jaquan Carlos to take a play, like, to not take the ball up once or twice, or when they're putting on the pressure, he can alleviate that pressure on Jaquan because he can dribble the ball. I know Adrian Autry after the Maryland game said, we only have one real ball handler right now. What's wrong with Kyle Cuff? He's a shooting guard. He's 6'2". I haven't seen him be careless with the ball. It's not like he's a freshman or anything like that. So what is wrong with Kyle Cuff? He can dribble. He can shoot. When he plays more than 10 minutes, he's pretty effective for the most part because, anytime you play less than 10 minutes, it's impossible to get into a rhythm. It's just really impossible, especially in a college basketball game. So I want to see Kyle Cuff, doesn't have to start, but I want to see him get extended minutes. I want to see him play 15 minutes a game, especially getting into conference play. He hasn't played too much basketball because of injuries, but theoretically he's a veteran. He can dribble, he can score, and when he plays more minutes, he's more effective.
Jordan, I love every word you just said there. I've been Kyle Cuff supporter. Even last season, I liked Kyle Cuff. I thought even the few minutes he got last season, he made an impact. And it goes to show this season, every time he's on the floor, you said it, he's doing something positive. He's not turning the ball over. He's not just on the floor to be on the floor. He's creating shots. He's making shots. And as you said, it's, when you lose a ball handler, JJ Starling, Kyle Cuff's another guy that can facilitate the offense, can feed the ball into the paint. I think it's a no-brainer from Autry to play this guy. He went to Kansas. Like, he has talent. It's not as though he's, doesn't have the talent. He can't play at this level. He can. Can he do it to the highest quality? No, but he could definitely be an option off the bench for this team. Given your struggles, you have to find something new. And again, that kind of points to Griffin, to your take. The criticism comes with Autry is when he's not doing the obvious things that are the X's and O's. And, I think playing Kyle Cuff more minutes is quite clearly an obvious decision, given that it's not like he's making a negative impact on the floor. He's making positive impacts. You can just see that through watching him and through stats as well. I know they're not great because he hasn't gotten a ton of minutes, but you can clearly see he's making an impact.
Yeah, I mean the stats prove themselves. Like when Kyle Clough plays for more than 10 minutes, he puts up 10 points, and I guess that is somewhat effective. I just go back to last season and like just watching him on the floor, it wasn't all that wonderful. But
Oh, he's
one
coming
thing,
off 2 seasons of injuries.
yeah, but I don't know. But like if you're gonna play him, Adrian Autry, then do it like do it. Actually do it. Don't just give him 4 minutes in the second quarter or in the first half midway through towards the end of the first half and then not play him again. Like that doesn't do anything for him. But also, like the one thing that sticks out with Kyle Cuff for me is just like he comes into the game, he gives you like one like explosive play, whether that's like a step back three or like an almost poster jam. Like he's good for almost dunking on someone like once every other game, and it's just like oh, well, there's where Kyle Cuff is, and then you don't really see him for like 4 or 5 games. Just like oh, where has he been? It's like if I want to see Kyle Cuff, give me a reason to see Kyle Cuff. Have him prove it. I mean, Syracuse is not the better going for them right now. Might as well put him in, give him some of Lucas Taylor's minutes, who hasn't been really effective. So I like to see it, see if it works out. If it doesn't, then hopefully Syracuse doesn't go to him again. Syracuse needs to figure something out, and if Kyle Cuff's going to be that guy, if like you say, maybe he's that guy.
Yeah, I mean, Adrian actually talked about changes incoming after that Maryland game, and I think Kyle Cuff needs to be one of them. I know Lucas Taylor hasn't been great offensively. He has been pretty solid defensively. And I will acknowledge one of the hard things to do is to put both Kyle Cuff and Jaquan Carlos on the court at the same time because then you have a 6 footer and a 6'2" guy on the floor, which depending on the team you're playing is a pretty short lineup in this day and age of college basketball. But like Griffin said, why not? I mean, you're at a point in the season where you need to figure something out, especially without JJ Starling. So why not? And figuring out what works and playing with it, especially against Bucknell on Saturday, could be a thing to do. AJ, what's your second take?
A second take, I couldn't think of anything else for basketball. I tried drafting up some player stuff with Donnie Freeman maybe, but given Autry's disliking of wanting to play Freeman late in games, I opted to shy away from the men's basketball team. I thought, man, maybe I'll go the route of the women's team, but fortunately, women's basketball team have lost a lot of key players from last season. They too have kind of had struggling play in the ACC, unlike in the men's side. On the women's side, is probably the best conference in basketball, or one of the best, a very loaded ACC. So it's going to be tough for them in conference play. So where else am I going to go? I'm going to go to the men's lacrosse team. I think Syracuse men's lacrosse will be in the Final Four. They'll be in Foxborough come the summer. They'll make a deep run this year. Gary Gait will prove all of his critics wrong. He can win consistently in big games. Joey Spallina will be undisputed best player in lacrosse, in men's lacrosse. So I have this Syracuse men's lacrosse team making a big run, getting back to where their standard is, which is being in the Final Four.
That would be great because Syracuse lacrosse, I mean, they were the say 1A basketball and then like 2A was lacrosse back in the day. And lacrosse, they've taken a couple of years off. Last season was supposed to be a big year for the team. And credit to Gary Gait. I mean, he beat top 5 Virginia. He beat a top 5 Duke team, and then he beat a top 5 John Hopkins team. 3 top 5 wins when he didn't even have won the previous years. And so for Gary Gait, he showed that you can do it. I think for Joey Spallina, a lot is going to fall on his shoulders. I mean, last year when he hit in his sophomore season, people expected him to be one of, if not the best player in college lacrosse. And you saw it in games against teams that didn't really matter or against teams that weren't great. But against those high flyers, he didn't necessarily put up the statistical numbers that people wanted from him. And that doesn't say he was not making impact because of a lot of what Joey Spallina doesn't really show up on the stat sheet. He's often getting the hockey assist, whether it's their second or third pass to the goal. But his facilitating at X is really, really good. That's kind of what he's known for. Now it's just for him to step up as an upperclassman, now a junior, to feel that presence, give him that X factor, that star power that people know he has because he's one of the best talents in college lacrosse. Now it's just for him to show it game in and game out And if that can do it, Syracuse has a really good defense. They brought in some transfers. They didn't lose many players. It'll be interesting to see the goalie situation for Syracuse lacrosse, and if they can all mesh together, because there's a lot of talent on that field. If they can mesh together, then Final Four is definitely not out of the question.
I
Well, I
was
can tell you the goalie situation is definitely Jimmy McCool. What were you saying, AJ?
I was gonna say that. I think Jimmy McCool is, from the signs we saw him briefly last season, looks like the real deal. And if he can have a big year, that will also bolster the team as well.
Yeah, I mean he's got the dog in him too. We had a picture on WAER Sports' Twitter, Twitter, excuse me, WAER Sports Talks Twitter, where he was shirtless before the Hobart game, and it was 15 degrees. So if you're man enough to do that, we'll see what he does in net. I've heard good things, just like AJ said, but I mean I think that's the biggest thing is they get almost everyone back from that team last year. Now the Jake Stevens loss is definitely going to hurt, especially on the wings of the face-off, and just the leadership aspect of it. But I mean, this big freshman class that's now juniors is just going to grow together even more. John Mullen at the face-off X is huge. He was a beast at the end of last year. And I actually now have a take about the men's lacrosse team, but I'll let Griffin get his second one in first. But I love that take, AJ. Syracuse men's lacrosse is going to the Final Four this year.
This is going to be a little spicy one, but I
Okay.
think that Fran Brown has showed less than halfway through the season that he was already the best coach on campus, and there's a real argument to be made that he was the best coach on campus before the season started. So I mean the
Before the season started.
yeah, before the season started. I hate to use this word, but there's just some sort of aura that Fran Brown has that he just carries around Syracuse, and he brought instant change. I mean, look, less than a month after Fran Brown got the job, Syracuse got one of the best portal quarterbacks in the country. You brought in Kyle McCord. You bring in coordinators and offensive coaches that have real college and NFL experience. This was no longer the Dino Babers show. This is the Fran Brown and Company crusade. You got NFL coaches, Will Nixon, Ross Douglas, who was a coach under Bill Belichick, the same position. He was the wide receivers coach at the New England Patriots. He came over to Syracuse to become the wide receivers coach. You keep your star players. That's fine. When coaches get fired, you often see their best players leave. Rondé Gadsden, Marlowe Wax, Justin Barron, they all came. They all stayed. You bring in Fadil Diggs. You bring in two massive offensive tackles, Big Wash and Big Spoon, Savion Washington, Demetrius Featherspoon. They stay. They provide, Syracuse big problem at depth at offensive line the past couple of years. Was that a problem this year? No. There were some injuries at offensive line in the middle of that offensive line, but people flew in. You had starters from last season who took backup roles this year, but when injuries happened, they filled in perfectly. The offensive line for the most part was great. Kyle McCord slinging the ball. You got offensive players, but you also got defensive stars. Devin Grant probably made the biggest and most important play of the season against Miami, that scoop and score. He came from Buffalo with Robert Wright, the defensive coordinator slash linebackers coach. I mean, what Fran Brown has done for Syracuse, what Fran Brown has done for the community, it just doesn't happen. And I know Gary Gate had a great season. Adrian Autry's done an okay job last season, a little struggles this season. Coach FLJ has done a great job with the women's program, especially last season. But Fran Brown this year, we're talking 2024, has done more for Syracuse athletics than I think any coach since Boeheim. And I think that's a big difference in what Fran Brown has been able to do. And that's why he's, in my opinion, the best coach on campus right now.
I can't disagree with right now. But last year when he was hired, I would probably venture to say that it was Coach Felicia Leggett-Jack, just given the season that the women's team had. I mean, they went from being bad to middle tier in the conference in her first year, and then second year, I mean, they were like one of the best teams in the conference with a significantly less talent than the other top teams in the conference as well. So, I like it now for sure. And probably about halfway through the season, I can get on board with you, especially now with the women's team not performing as well this year. But definitely last year it had to have been Coach Alicia Leggett-Jack, in my opinion. What do you think, AJ?
Yeah, Griffin, I agree with most of what you say, especially given the success that Coach Brown had this first season, exceeded everyone's expectations. But I think you're also leaving out head coach Ian McIntyre, men's soccer. Head coach
Yeah.
brought a national title only a few years ago. I know they've had a few down years since then, but he's also been on the hill the longest out of anyone. I want to say he's the longest coach for any Syracuse sport right now. I'm not entirely. I think
Any sport that matters.
yeah, I think so. So you can't leave out him. I know you're giving me a look now here, but and also
No.
the other point is Fran Brown's got to keep doing this though. This was just one season. He's got to do it next season. And if this team cannot hang on to Kyle McCord, that schedule next year is a lot tougher. They've got the Tennessee game. They have away at Clemson, away at Georgia Tech, away at Miami, away at SMU. Those are not easy games. It's a much harder schedule, especially this season too. If you look back, they caught a lot of breaks. Virginia Tech was supposed to be a lot better. NC State was supposed to be a lot better. So they caught a few breaks in the schedule this year that definitely helped the team. Next year's schedule is a lot more daunting. I love head coach Fran Brown as much as the next person, but he's got to do it consistently. He's got to bring in the recruits consistently, be active in the transfer portal consistently. And I mean, that schedule next year is a lot tougher. There's no denying that.
Yeah.
That schedule's tough.
If Fran Brown goes 8-4 next year, I think that would be an enormous win for the program. Yes, one back, or I guess 2 wins back if they win tonight. But that schedule is just, I mean, that's tough to look at for next year for the football team. Great
Notre Dame, too,
experiences in terms of the road games, but what?
Notre Dame. I forgot to mention Notre Dame as well.
Yeah, they play 4 playoff teams.
Yeah.
They play SMU. So I get, still playoff team, even though they got bounced by Penn State. Notre Dame, Clemson, and Tennessee.
Yep.
That's 4 college football playoff teams from the year before, in which all of them, except for Notre Dame, are returning their starting quarterback.
Yes, and all are on the road.
And all are on the road. Like, that is nuts. Nuts of a schedule to have.
Miami was a bubble team, if you want to call it.
I mean, Syracuse knocked Miami out. Yeah. I mean, Syracuse knocked Miami out of the college football playoff. You got Bill Belichick coming to the Dome with North Carolina. I mean, that is such and this is probably not the right word, but a juicy schedule to look at going into next year for Syracuse football. They're still going to end it on a good note tonight, but I think the consensus is we don't disagree with you, but there's some other coaches around the campus that could have definitely good arguments. AJ's take inspired me and reminded me about what I said at the end of last year, and I'm still a big believer in it. In terms of the men's lacrosse team, just to clarify. One, I think in terms of AJ's take, I think Joey Spallina is going to be huge on this team in terms of if he can find ways to both pass and score. And when I say score, I mean dodge to score, dodge towards the net and find ways to score that way. Really, right now, the last couple of years, he's been more of an outside shooter to an extent. That's going to be huge in terms of Syracuse men's lacrosse taking that next step to the Final Four. But I think in terms of this year, the best player and the best offensive player on this team, scoring wise, is going to be Michael Leo. Michael Leo is the most underrated offensive player in the country, in my opinion. He does so much that nobody sees. He had 28 goals, 9 assists last year. So he's not an assist guy. He's more of a scorer. He had 18 goals his freshman year. All of this with a whole bunch of scorers around him. I mean, Joey Spallina needs the ball. Owen Hiltz needs the ball. Sam English needed the ball last year. Jake Stevens had the ball a lot last year. Before that, it was Dordovic and all of those guys. Like, he has not had the ball that much, yet he scores at a pretty efficient rate, given that. So I think... And if you look at what this team needs, it needs a dodger that can score. Owen Hiltz is an outside shooter. Owen Hiltz can shoot outside like anybody's business. Joey Spallina can pass like nobody else in the country. Who's that guy that's going to dodge to the net and score when you need a goal? Who's going to ISO it if you want to compare it to men's basketball? Who's going to ISO it when you need a goal before the end of the half or before the end of the game and you need to tie it up? It's going to be Michael Leo. Michael Leo is the one that can ISO. He's the one that can get his own shot the most. And I think Syracuse needs to exploit that a lot more this year because not only will that open up the offense for Michael Leo, it'll open up Owen Hiltz because they'll have to help on Michael Leo. It'll open up Joey Spallina, who can pass and distribute and score as well. Sam English still on this team, let's not forget. So I think they need to exploit and use Michael Leo in an ISO mode a little bit more, and he can be the best scorer on this team and lead this team to a Final Four and potentially a national championship game.
Yeah, I think you're on. I'm on board with you, Jordan, because it's similar to what I said. This team just has the talent, and Michael Leo, I think, can really be. I don't want. I think this. When people say this, it gets a negative take, but like the Robin to Joey Spallina, that kind of that second guy that this team can rely on, and there's just so much talent, and that freshman class from 2 years ago is now juniors, and they're so experienced. It's a tight knit group. I think we saw all that last year, and really, I think there's still a little bit of that big game, can't deliver. I know they had the big wins last season, but I think towards the end of the year, maybe they got a little burnt out in the ACC tournament. They didn't play well. And then, of course, against Denver, they just never really were in that game. So if they can get over that big game kind of jinx, it should be smooth sailing for this team, not to win it all, but to at least get to the Final Four. And I don't want to put too much expectation on the roster and Gary Gait, but that should be the expectation. Get to Foxborough, because there's certainly no denying the talent this team has.
Yeah, and especially after what might be a rough basketball season, I mean, there's going to be a lot of expectations. A lot of people are going to be watching the lacrosse team to hopefully, with all that expectations, bring some light after a tough basketball season. So it'll be interesting to see for them who steps up. And I mean, you return that junior class is just so tough. And then you got Billy Dwan anchoring the defense. He's still only a junior, one of the best defensemen in the country. So it'll be fun. I'm looking forward to lacrosse season. Times only get busier for us, but that lacrosse energy and the feel around campus will be exciting.
I think the expectation is definitely Final Four national championship for the lacrosse team this year, given how many players they bring back. I mean, they bring back their entire defense. Caden Cole, Billy Dewan, Riley Figueres, like the entire defense is back. Basically, the entire offense is back too, for the most part. Yes, they have a new man in net, but having been following the team for the last 2 years, Jimmy McCool would be starting at other top college programs if it wasn't for Will Mark being so good as well. And they're going to be preseason top four. I mean, the expectations are going to be there. I'm still shocked the schedule has not come out yet. I don't know what is going on with this. I mean, I know we've been leaked pieces and pieces, but the season starts in a month. It starts February 1st, because the Saturday, February 1st is when the season's going to start, and it's like a month away. We still don't have the schedule, but I think this is going to be a very fun lacrosse season to track. I think the expectations are high. I think this team, given the experiences of the last 2 years, 2 years ago at the 8 and 9-ish year where they just couldn't close out games and they were in every game, they couldn't close it out. Last year, they closed out, as Griffin said, a couple top five wins, and they just couldn't do it in the game against Denver, who had a really good defense, and some games like against Duke in the ACC tournament, Notre Dame at Notre Dame. But I think this would be a very fun lacrosse season to watch out for. And that about does it for the Ostrom Avenue podcast here. It's around the holidays. I hope everyone's Christmas and Hanukkah have been good. New Year's just right around the corner. So we decided to do some Ostrom Take Factory, just talk about Syracuse athletics a little bit. I think this episode, at least for me, energized me on Syracuse men's lacrosse, and Syracuse women's lacrosse. They should have a pretty good year as well. Also starting that same weekend, first weekend in February. But just a couple of reminders: Syracuse football, one last game, the Holiday Bowl tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern time. McClure remodeling countdown to kickoff starting at 7. Yes, an hour-long McClure remodeling countdown to kickoff ahead of Syracuse's bowl game against Washington State, aiming for its 10th win for the first time since 2018. And then also Syracuse men's basketball playing tomorrow, Saturday, against Bucknell, 2 p.m. Eastern tip-off, 1:30 McClure remodeling countdown to tip-off, and of course the double overtime up until 6 p.m. there. Syracuse athletics rolling into the new year. Syracuse does have one more game next week before the new year. Probably won't get a podcast before then, so I'll just tease the coverage now. But Syracuse back in conference play against Wake Forest on Tuesday, December 31st, right before the new year. 2 p.m. tip-off, in the Dome for that one, 1:30 p.m. Eastern. McClure remodeling countdown to tip-off as well. We'll be back next week, probably towards the end of the week, for another podcast. And as always, keep following us on Twitter at Ostrom Avenue Pod and our YouTube at WAR Sports Talk for both the Ostrom Avenue podcast and the live streams of both Sports Night and the Double Overtime throughout the football, men's basketball, and men's lacrosse season. you're going to want to keep tuning in every single week to the Ostrom Avenue podcast.